The Missouri Compromise. So the thing is, we're going to see here that despite having ended last time with the whole era of good feelings, we're going to see sectional crises occur, especially now over slavery, as we're going to get in the Missouri Compromise. And party unity is going to really crack under these pressures of like banking issues and tariff policies. And by 1824, each region is going to have their own presidential candidate, in fact. So, right after the War of 1812, when we're literally looking at like 1815 to 1819, there's a wave of post-war prosperity. Basically, Europeans wanted goods that they hadn't been able to get during the War of 1812, and so now that trade restrictions have been lifted, they're going to buy, basically they're buying a lot of goods. On top of that, farmers really can expand and buy out a lot more land because land in the West is a lot more easily available, partly because of like easy terms of credit, and partly because now they had broken the back of a lot of Indian resistance in these Western regions. This really is going to make a speculative frenzy though, and land sales are going to really soar. However, by about 1818, European markets for American goods have kind of returned to normal, and this actually means that there's going to be a sink in cotton prices in England, and this is going to tie into basically Americans' economy, because cotton was really the most valuable American export at this time. And so this is really going to cause the Panic of 1819 with a fall in price of cotton. Basically, this affects other commodities. I'm not going into all the economics of this. But what really is going to drive home and ensure an economic downturn would settle into an actual like economic depression during this time is the policy of the Bank of the United States. Basically, the Bank of the United States during this time would stop all of their loans, call in all their debts, and even refuse to honor drafts that were drawn on its branches in like the South and the West. Now, the thing is, when it comes to like economics and depressions and recessions, the thing is you need money going back into the economy. And so when the Bank of the United States like calls in their loans and is basically calling in their debts and isn't giving loans anymore, money isn't being put back into the economy. And what happens is like bankruptcies mushroom because creditors are going to force like the liquidation of farms or real estate in order to get back the money that they had loaned. And so this in turn basically makes the Bank of the United States be seen as the monster who's, destroying the hopes and the dreams and the future for a lot of farmers. Now, a lot of these farmers and planters are also going to charge that whole tariff of 1816, remember that first protective tariff, was unfair because it raised their costs, and they felt like it was unconstitutional because they felt like it was for the sole benefit of northern manufacturers and wasn't necessarily helping them but was hurting them. So we're seeing already kind of a split here of North and South once again. Which brings us to the institution of slavery. The thing is, this institution really wasn't a hugely divisive issue until about 1819. Yes, slavery has been dealt with before. We saw it with, like the Three-Fifths Compromise when making the Constitution, and then the Northwest Ordinance and the Southwest Ordinance basically saying no slavery north of Ohio and yes to slavery south of the Ohio River. And then they had also seen the prohibition of the African slave trade in 1807. A lot of this, but despite this, the thing is during the 1780s, so yeah, I'm rewinding here for a second. During the 1780s, we're going to see a huge increase of the production of cotton in the United States. And the United States production of cotton really means that more and more slave states are going to be dependent even more on slavery. The hope of a natural death to slavery is really gone by 1819. It's really interesting if you go back and look at some of the primary sources from like George Washington's point of view and like Thomas Jefferson's point of view when it comes to slavery, because a lot of the founding fathers actually thought that slavery would just come to a natural end in the United States. And it's really interesting because they're like, oh yeah, it won't be an institution within 2 to 3 generations. But a lot of them never freed the people that they had enslaved. So it's really complicated. Although some of them did free, although it was even then that was complicated because like George Washington himself actually, he frees the people he has enslaved upon his death. But in the document that he frees them once Martha has died. Although Martha then went on to free a lot of them prematurely because it would be a threat to her life to have slaves, to have these enslaved who would only be free once she died. Anyway, sorry, jumping back to 1819 and everything like that. The thing is, we're seeing a lot of new slave states come into the Union. This is going to include like Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, even Florida. And so all of this is going to come to a head with Missouri. The thing is, Missouri, Northerners thought it would be inhospitable to slavery, and yet by February of 1819, it has clearly fallen under political control of slaveholders. So, when Missouri wants to join the Union as a slave state, James Talmadge of New York is going to introduce a bill that would mandate in Missouri a ban on future slave imports, as well as a program of gradual emancipation as a precondition for Missouri to become a slave state. So this would basically say that this is the Talmadge Amendment, and this was basically the idea that Missouri would be a slave state, but only temporarily. In fact, that gradual emancipation would basically be that the children of slaves would be given their emancipation automatically. Now, Missourians are going to reject the Talmadge Amendment. They argued that a state had absolute sovereignty in drafting their own constitution, and any kind of attempt by Congress to set conditions for statehood was unconstitutional. Now, technically, the Talmadge Amendment did pass in the House of Representatives, but it was always blocked in the Senate because the thing is, at this point in time, there were exactly 11 free states and 11 slave states. It's just the free states, even though if you look on this map, you can see them green. Even though they seem smaller in actual like geography, their population was a lot larger. And so that's why like it would always pass in the House of Representatives, but not in the Senate where it's evenly divided. Southerners even spoke openly of secession if Missouri was denied admission as a slave state. So kind of keep that in mind. Once again, we're seeing this idea of secession much earlier than when we finally are going to get to the Civil War. So in the end, they're going to get the Compromise of 1820, which is also just known as the Missouri Compromise. In this compromise, there's a few different parts. Firstly, Missouri is going to enter the Union as a slave state. The second part was they would admit Maine also as a free state. The thing is, Maine formerly had been part of Massachusetts up until this point. The third part is the North is going to demand a prohibition on slavery in the remainder of the Louisiana Purchase north of the 36° 30th parallel, which is basically, as you can see there, the Missouri Compromise line, and that's that southern boundary of Missouri. Now, this compromise actually almost unraveled when Missouri submitted a constitution that required the state legislature to bar the entry of free black people. This would deny technically African-American citizens of the United States the right to move freely from like one state to another, and thus deny a citizen a right that should have been theirs. But the South is going to be quick to point out that, well, the free states already restricted the right of a lot of free black people. Like they wouldn't let them, vote or serve in a militia or serve on like juries and such. That basically in the North even, it was acceptable that African Americans, they're second-class citizens at this time. And so Missouri's constitution is going to be accepted, but with a provision that it was never meant to discriminate against citizens of other states. The thing is, though, with the Missouri Compromise, this is really going to make the South realize they are now making up a minority in the nation because of the huge population growth in the North. So, I ask you as a part of your journal, do you think they could have ended slavery in America at this point? Would that have been a viable option? Explain your reasoning, yes or no, as well.